Who exactly are these people? Are they short-term, long-term? What percentage are people who are handicapped and will always need assistance? What percentage are just people who are trying to get a job? And I think if you can't define who your tenants will be, then you'll have a hard time finding the right accommodation for them.
When I got to City Hall, I'm a new councillor. I've just been elected for a year and a half. I started as chair of the Affordable Housing Committee. One of the questions I asked is, who are these 80,000 people? Are they mostly seniors? Are they? And we are looking into that. We are having a study, but right now we don't know. That's another problem that we have. And my question is, how do you expect me to have a strategy for something that I don't know exactly who they are? So we've had a preliminary report on that. I don't have the numbers with me, but it's something that the city is looking into. And we need to have a real look into who are we building housing or who are we housing at TCHC. But truth be told, we're always hitting on TCHC, that they don't do a good job and they're I mean, we also have to understand that their funds have been decreasing. Their fundings are still decreasing on a yearly basis by the federal government. And it's continuing to happen. So the pressure on TCHC is increasing and the funds are decreasing. So there's a lot of things that we need to look into TCHC. I think there's a governance issue that needs to be looked into at TCHC. But we also have to understand the pressures that TCHC is under.
Thank you. John, did you have a comment? No.
Hi, I am from TCHC, so I'll just give a couple facts, just in answer to your question, who lives at TCHC. Over 50% of the units are bachelors or one bedroom, so it gives you a sense of the size of households we can have. 25% of the households are seniors, and about 32% are receiving OWSP, so they have a fixed income of sorts. The rest are earning incomes of various sorts. However, it's much more complicated than that because households have more than one source of income. So they may have OW or ODSP, but also be working. So there's a range of things that are going on, and it's more complicated. One of the reasons that Anna mentioned that costs are going up and our revenue stays flat, our rental revenue stays flat because people pay 30% of their income, it's pretty well fixed. An average rent might be $375. But costs, as you can imagine, keep going up. So just a couple of things.
Thank you for that. We have a question.
Just as a fact of curiosity, the average income of somebody that lives at TCHC is $14,000?
The average
household.
16,000.
16,000. And New York is about 25,000? Just as a comparison.
Thank you. The question.
I'm David Walsh. I'm a businessman. I volunteer on a nonprofit that's leasing some houses from TCHC for mental health challenges. And from an economic standpoint, I see that it really makes sense because like in one house we have 5 people living in very low incomes, and they're getting support from a community organization, St. John the Compassionate, here around the corner, that's providing support, and another one we're partnering with Margaret Fraser House. And so there's partners in the community and there's volunteers, and if we had to relocate those 5 people into 5 apartments, we could figure out the cost of that. So it really makes sense to use these scattered units. They're small scale and they're integrated into neighborhoods. So I just wonder why we can't use more of the scattered units for this use.
I can start with that. This is exactly what the special working group is looking at. Can we work with other nonprofit organizations? I mean, there's no question that it is more expensive to operate the TCHC scattered houses than to operate the units. But if we can maintain the stock in the affordable housing portfolio. It doesn't necessarily have to be operated by TCHC, but if we can maintain it into the affordable housing portfolio, maybe with some of those organizations. For example, Habitat for Humanity already said they wanted to buy quite a number of them. If we can have that, that's the solution that we need to look forward. Instead of just selling, okay, let's sell it in the open market, which would reduce the stock. So if we can work with organizations such as yours, I believe that's the way to go, and that's exactly what the special working group is looking at.
I think you have to look at it on a case-by-case basis, but I'm not convinced. I mean, I was a business person before I was in politics and before broadcasting, and I just think that, you know, while it's fine to say that, you know, that we have those houses and we should use them, I think if you really took an honest look at the cost of servicing and operating all of those scattered houses all over the place, and then you looked at the flip side of it, which is the value that could be derived from those houses, because they are undoubtedly dramatically increased in value, as every other house in Toronto is, that you find it didn't make any sense to keep, and that you would end up, if you sold, maybe not all of them, but many of them, with funds you could then put to better use, either renovating the remaining properties or even doing something more sensible for the kind of people that your organization serves. So it's one of the reasons.
But, you know, if you're building new housing, you probably only put, have 30% of vulnerable people. You probably only have 30% of vulnerable people in the development, and the rest would be more in market. So you're spending all that public money, and you're only getting a third of the units. And these houses, you know, like they're 100% serving the vulnerable population. And this house I'm talking about at Queen and Broad units, maybe worth $500,000 or $600,000. If you move those 5 people to existing TCHC units, you might be right. But if you have to build new units, you know, it would certainly be a lot more expensive. So you really got to look at the economics. I'm a real estate developer, so you know I know the economics, and I'd be glad to show them to you.
Question. Oh, Bob has a question.
If I could just add as well, is that the 2,000 people that currently live in the TCHC, those scattered houses, they have to be relocated into the TCHC, basically market units. So we're going to be losing market units. We're going to be creating condominiums that are going to have more of the low income, and we're going to be losing the revenue of the market rents that we have. So we need to be careful. Again, I'm not saying that we need to save all the houses. There are probably a group of them that need to be sold. But we need to look at some of those families that can buy the houses. We have had deputants at City Hall that came and said, I've said I want to buy the house. And we have organizations such as Habitat for Humanity that said, we want to help those families buy the house. So let's put that together. Let's work with some organizations. And at the end of the day, I do believe that some of the houses in the portfolio will need to have to be put up for sale. But we need to look at these houses and the people that live in the houses and the organizations that are working at the houses.
Hi, I'm Bob Burnett, I'm an architect, and I've had the good fortune to have designed 1,000 beds of student residence housing that's worked very successfully as a form of shared housing. So I'd like to ask about the housing model that we're using. Like in the old days, there were rooming houses, there were residential hotels, and I know that the shared housing that I built has been very successful with students. And at the time, this a few years ago, I'd given up trying to build affordable housing because I wasn't having any progress. We could build these units, shared units, for about $25,000 per person versus other subsidized housing that I was building, where you're building an apartment unit at $125,000 per person. So I'll just say that I also have some friends that live out in the country, and there are 20 families that all live together, and they share communal space, and share the dining. That's working very successfully. Now, granted, those people don't have mental health difficulties, but I'm wondering whether we're too locked into the housing model of everybody having to have everything in the one unit.
Thank you, Bob. Frida, do you want to?
I think it's an intriguing question to look at the kind of product that's being delivered. I think it's worth a hard look, and I think it's already happening, actually, because you've got various organizations that in the singles and in the live-work environment, units will take on a different form. And they'll be usually smaller and less expensive to build, so that's already happening. I have to say, though, that I don't think, generally speaking, in an urban environment, the communal ideas will work. I think people move on in their lives and become students. So I think that they cease to be students at some point, at least most of us. I have a couple of children who are still students, who should be, but you've basically got to look at the social circumstances surrounding that kind of environment and whether we're serving the needs of those people or not. I know it's a tough question, but as I said, I think in an urban environment, communal living, I'm sure it's the answer. Certainly revisiting the type of unit that we're building is absolutely necessary because, and I think they're going through that right now. Certainly the Pan Am Village is an example of how you can build units that have a certain function at the outset for this kind of communal living, and then can be turned into market and/or assisted housing once they've gone through that exercise. So it's definitely possible, and there's certainly not been enough thought given to design modifications and the type of dwelling units we're
In a way, if we can say that we've got to think outside the box on this, and that's why I'm such a believer that if we bring in, I mean, if you go back to one of the programs that worked well, I think people say it was quite expensive relative to the degree of government subsidy that came both in those days, mainly from CMHC, but also from other levels of government. The projects that involved the religious communities, the cooperative housing movement, and some of the cultural organizations, they stand today, they're quite old now because they were built 34 years ago, the sort of Czechoslovakian community or whatever. They weren't that innovative in their built form, but they were, people took on as an organization and they cared for and continued to operate this housing for a lot of their seniors. And I think if we turn back to some of those organizations and include people like you and said, all right, bring us a model that will work financially, but that also may have a different feature about it, whether it's shared accommodations that are, whatever you call it, shared space, shared common space or whatever. Who knows? But if we don't ask people, they're never given consent. We turn us to the same old sort of government blueprints over and over again, and you get the same result. It's the old sort of definition of insanity. You keep engaging in the same behavior and expect a different result. So I think when you talk about a principle in terms of involving an imaginative approach that comes from people who are not the same old people would produce dividends for us and some new ideas that would work financially and otherwise.
Anna, did you want to add something?
I just want to add that when we talk about housing, we can't just talk about one solution fits all, because people have different needs. Like I said, we have people that what they need is supportive housing. We have people that all they need is a rent supplement. We talk about this list, and that's why I think it's really important that we look into this list, because we don't have 80,000 people living in the streets of Toronto. They're housed. So a lot of them, with a rent supplement, would probably solve their issue. But there are other ones that doesn't matter what rent supplement you give them, what they need is supportive housing or seniors housing. Or, there's families that we could actually maybe break that cycle and move them into affordable home ownership. So there's different solutions in the housing, in the affordable housing portfolio. We need to move into, we need to have these options available. Because one thing that I think is important is that we need to move people in this cycle. We need to break this cycle. I think it's important to have this idea that we need to help people to move, to go from a rent supplement or a TCHC and to see if they can move into the next stage and have those things available. I think that's also important while we're developing the housing strategy, that we have those options available.
Thank you. Let's just start first with Anna, is it yours?
Nick has been knocking at all the right doors. The issue is we got the federal provincial agreement signed, and the city did get funding, but we got $108 million that has to last us until 2015. That's a drop in the bucket. And so the city divided this into rent supplements, into some money for home ownership, into new build, and into renovations to help with the tower renewal project. So it's very, very little money that we have to help projects such as this one. And that's why it's essential that we do it. It has to be in partnership with organizations such as Build. It has to be with some tax alleviation and not so much giving you the cash up front, but maybe cash incentive, tax incentives. That's the only way we're going to be able to do it in the city.
Sir, I feel your pain. I know it's very, very difficult to construct a strictly social housing project from scratch without assistance. It's almost impossible. I think you have to lower your sights, though, and perhaps maybe accept that you could build, rather than having the whole loaf, you have part of the loaf, and that you marry some market housing to your assisted housing objectives. That's probably the best way to proceed. I also seek out from the councillor and your colleagues complete relief, tax relief on all the units, complete levy relief, and hopefully Bill is giving you the land if you're actually going to carry this out, because that would certainly reduce your cost. But it certainly points up the model that I was proffering, which is simple because it basically is self-financed. And again, the numbers are much smaller. You don't get these one-shot buildings, but by reducing the percentage and spreading it over all the units that are being built is a fair and equitable way of getting the development community off their butts and involved in this environment, because they're not right now, except for the few like yourself and Daniels and some of the others. And that's what really needs to happen. It's not the only solution, but it can be a big part of the solution. And certainly, I commend your efforts. And I would get Scotiabank to allow you to provide second mortgage financing for your assisted purchase, for your market housing, for your purchasers who can't afford a down payment. It's one thing that I've been talking about for a long time, and would certainly offer up, but you need the banks to help you, because banks will not accept financing, first mortgage financing, if the developer is providing a second to the purchaser. They just reject it out of hand. And so the banks have to step up as well and say, yes, we'll allow you to put a second mortgage on this property.
Sorry.
Hi, I'm Yvette Roberts. I'm the coordinator of Young Parents No Fixed Address. I've been around for 15 years with about 30 agencies collaborating across Toronto addressing housing issues faced by young parents. I think for me, whenever we have this talk about affordable housing, there's two key issues. One starts off with the definition. Affordable housing is 20% below the market rent, which means that my current apartment, my two-bedroom apartment that I live in Scarborough, would be deemed affordable housing. What I pay is 40% of my income as a full-time professional person. What I pay is the exact amount that a mother with one child on welfare gets in total. Yet my place would be considered affordable based on the definition of affordable housing when you cost the rents across the rents across Toronto. So the definition alone of affordable housing, I don't qualify for Habitat for Humanity and options for homes. Well, Habitat for Humanity specifically, I need to have 5 children based on their criteria. I need to have about 4 or 5 children based on my income to qualify. And yet, I also don't qualify to buy a house just on the general market here in Toronto or even Scarborough, for that matter. So again, it's that whole definition of affordable housing. I think the other key piece, we lost between 2000 and 2008, we lost 66,000 rental units that cost $600 to $900. Yet we gained 48,000 rental units that cost $1,100 and above, which are those same units. They didn't do anything. They just put the rent up because that's what they can do.
Okay, can we go focus on
So my question is, one, can we please redefine the definition of affordable housing to make it more realistic for those of us who are truly working with low-income people who are in shelters? And secondly, I truly, support the idea of rental supplements. And for those on welfare, It's a simple matter of increasing the shelter allowance. A mother with one child is allowed $550 a month for rent. Doesn't exist, you know, and I have
I
welfare
think
workers.
this goes back to addressing the problems. There's just no money. What do we do? You know, what are the next steps?
I think everyone who's spoken is in agreement. There's quite a list of parties, government, not-for-profit, developers, etc., who need to be brought to a table and be giving their minds and their passion and energy to this problem together to come up with some real solutions to a very complex issue. I look at this room tonight and I see how many empty chairs there are. I know how many people work really hard to get the message out about the subject of this meeting tonight. So my question to all of you on the panel is just this. What are your top 2 ideas about how to get all of those parties motivated enough to come to this mythical table and sit around it and take this on as an issue that needs their time and energy now?
John, do you want to start?
Well, I suggested the one model we've already, again, I'm a great believer that you don't try and reinvent the wheel, you find things that work, and then you can replicate them. And I cited the example by the New York region, they do these regional housing leadership groups, and they're not meant to just sit around and have a gab fest, they're meant to sit together and bring people around the table. I mean, it's really what civic action does that I'm privileged to be the chair of. We can get people to sit around the table who ordinarily don't sit with each other. Labor, business, nonprofit organizations, they sometimes run into each other in their travels. And I think something like that is maybe the process part of it and the ingenuity part of it. And then you come up against the one that I'm not sure I have the answer to, which is the money side. Because you can have all the ingenious people you want, thinking of all the ideas back to our point earlier, about whether it's a shared base or this or that. And there isn't the money to help to seed these projects. Because historically, if you look at all the ones that have done well, whether it's the most recent one in Regent Park, or it's going way back, and some of these other ones that I referred to, they're cooperative or religious-based or community or cultural-based, they had generous support from the governments to make them happen. And I'm not sure that we're going to find any combination of people who sit at even as good an idea as this regional housing leadership table that are going to sit there and dream up a way to do this for money that doesn't, money that can't be recovered from the tenants. Otherwise, it would be done by somebody with such a good idea that somebody in the private sector would be doing it already on their own without any help from anybody. So I think that's a fundamental problem. I think that's going to require recognition on the part of the 2 senior levels of government in particular that they have to provide, when you hear Anna talk about the numbers of the money they have received for the next 2 or 3 years under the current agreements, and a total of $100 million divided by the 7 areas they have to recover divided by 3 or 4 years, it's not very much, to say the least. So I don't have an answer. I wish I could on that one. I suggested my answer not knowing the Housing Corporation. I'm horrified here has a debt of its own of $2 billion, notwithstanding how afraid was comments about the valley, but it's still horrifying here that there's more debt sitting around out there than all somebody like me that tries to keep very well informed of these things.
I think at the city we've been trying to reach out to some of these members. As part of our affordable housing committee, we do have a roundtable that we bring some of these members on a regular basis from United Way, Board of Trade, Building Trades, some of the nonprofit organizations, the Toronto Apartment Association. So they're all part of a roundtable that I meet with them on a regular basis, and we're actually going to come out with a report on our May 28th meeting on some of the discussions that we've had and some of the recommendations to our executive to try to tackle some of these issues. But it needs to be done, I believe, at least on a regional basis. And I think we need the help of the media, we need the help of our leaders. And one thing we have to say is that our mayor does bring a lot of attention to this issue. The fact that he goes around and visits these buildings, TCHC buildings, he does bring attention to the housing issue. So I hope that he continues to do that, because it's definitely helping my task of bringing the attention to the issue and stakeholders to the tables as well. So I think politicians leaders in the community, the media all have a job to make sure that this is part of the agenda. I always say there's two crucial issues that the city's facing right now is transit and housing. I think those are the two most important issues that we need to tackle in the city of Toronto. So hopefully some more city politicians think like that, and we can move forward.
I think certainly the idea of bringing all of the stakeholders to the table on a regular basis is absolutely critical, because the exchange of ideas, and as John's point was made earlier, well taken, not just to have a chit chat, but to actually roll up your sleeves and come up with real solutions. As for my industry, I can assure you that when the provincial government and federal government announced their joint funding a few years ago, it was a significant sum of money. All of a sudden, there was a whole bunch of people from my industry that were all of a sudden interested in social housing. It's human nature, it's no surprise. But once that funding dried up, can't find it. No one's interested. So it's important to, I think, for our industry, you have to, as I said earlier, you have to force them to the table. You have to mandate this. But you have to mandate it with an even-handed, fair approach. What we have now is it's actually so inconsistent. In one area of the city, it's one thing, in another, it's something else, or it doesn't exist at all. And then you got a councillor, well, that will sit me down and say, well, you have to deliver this because we need it. And then the discussion begins, and then you come up with a great solution. I mean, I would do it anyways, and I've done it on my own initiative, but it's important that we make this a mandatory obligation for my community. And I think that's where it has to start with the development industry. That's all I can say about it, really. You need to incentivize them. And you incentivize them not only with a fiscal model that works, but you also have to call on their social obligation. I mean, if you're truly a city builder, then this is what you're going to engage in. You're not just going to build bricks and mortar. You're going to try and create a social fabric. You have to put your money where your mouth is.
Excellent, thank you. There's so many questions, and I hate to say this, but we're at the end of the hour here. So I want to thank you for being here. I also want to thank my volunteers tonight. I don't know if you can see them out here. I want to thank St. Paul's for this great space. This is beautiful, isn't it? I just love it. As well as our sponsors, Castle Point, Beck Taxi Tribute, Sabera Group. They made this happen. So I thank you all. I also want to thank the panelists tonight for their time.